yogurt is pretty much just a vehicle for honey. This morning we had no food, so.
You are running a marathon.
I am going to run a marathon.
How did that happen?
Well, it's kind of your fault. Not really. You're just the one who kind of pushed me over the edge because you were ready to do it maybe before I would otherwise have been ready. I think where it comes from though is I have 2 bucket list items, at least in the conventional sense. I would love to touch every continent. And the second, more important, honestly, even bucket list item, although some of my longer runs have had me questioning it recently, is I want to do an Ironman. I think it would just be the coolest thing ever to hear, Sally Hand, you are an Ironman. And I had the really dark realization that in order to complete an Ironman, I would have to run a marathon. Like, I know the swimming and the biking are gonna be crazy challenging. I know that I probably am not like thinking of those as significant enough or like as hard as they actually are, but they don't really scare me. It's the running, because that was previously so foreign to me. It was like terrifying. In many ways, we'd been kind of dabbling with running a little bit. I was really resistant, feeling just like a little bit overwhelmed with the different goals that I had all at once. And you just kind of reached a point where you're like, you know what? I'm gonna run a marathon. You didn't put any pressure on me, but I am competitive. And I said, shoot, if you're doing it, I'm doing it too. I guess I better start training. So here we are.
Very cool. When is the marathon and when did you start training?
Yeah, so the marathon is September 15th. And you might need to help me with that one. When did we start training? It's a 6-month training program. We started, was it April? It was the beginning of April, like first day of April actually that we started training. And before that point, we had started doing some very short runs, like 2.5 to 3 miles, and those were killing me. Like, it was the kind of thing where I was running, wasn't one like a 13-minute pace, one of those runs down to the north end? Yeah, it was like a 13+ minute pace, and I was like murdered by the end of it. It was like 2.7 miles, and that's really insane to look back on, because now, it's July now, May, June, July, like 4 months later, including April, we just finished running 15 miles, and that sucked, but 3 miles is like, no problem. It feels short.
So how do you reconcile running a marathon and doing lots of cardio with your work in hormone and metabolic health?
Yeah, that's such a good question. When I first, let's say, got into the pro-metabolic space, kind of became aware of that world, running is something that scared me, because a lot of people who are in this space in terms of lifestyle and nutrition, I think, came from really maybe negative relationships with cardio, with running specifically. We're under eating, we're coming from a place where they were just like running themselves into the ground. Experience with diet culture. Unfortunately, in our society, I think it's changing, but historically, especially over the past 20 or 30 years, I think there's been this really like unhealthy culture around running where we're like running away from something, running away from looking a certain way or being a certain way instead of like running towards something and actually pursuing fitness. Like when you consider what fitness means, it means to be fit for something. And I think running can fit into that. We can look at it constructively. But anyways, when you are running away from something, you're not nourishing your body properly, you are not recovering properly, yeah, it wreaks havoc on your hormones. Or if you're coming from a really depleted and stressed state, oftentimes you're putting yourself into the state of stress where you can't recover from it. But as you frequently say, like there's a huge difference between like a bad concept and a bad application of a concept, right? And I think we've seen a lot of bad applications of running, but if you're being honest with yourself and you actually look at the science, you cannot deny the benefits of cardiovascular training. And you can also not deny that historically throughout time, like humans have been endurance creatures, at least to some extent. Like our bodies are designed very much to traverse long distances, both walking and running. Things get messed up with, modern running shoes and the fact that we're running on concrete all the time or walking on concrete all the time. That could be a whole nother rabbit hole that we went down, I guess, another time. But there's a lot of it that's been messed up, that's been detached from our original design. But if we actually consider human physiology and design, it's clear that our bodies are meant to run. And the question that raises in me is, okay, how can we reconcile this with hormone health, with fertility? How can we do this in a way that is going to promote overall health and fitness and not, run us into the ground? I would say what running supportively looks like is number one, like you're not running fasted. We're never doing fasted cardio. That is a surefire way to elevate your stress hormones, keep them up. And then of course that's gonna have a really negative cascading effect on your fertility hormones in particular. So we wanna make sure we're well fueled. We wanna make sure that we are eating enough protein as well as carbohydrates. Both are super important, obviously fat's super important, but striking the right balance between carbohydrates and protein where you are able to hold onto muscle, repair tissues, but also you have those carbohydrates easily accessible. You're able to fill up your glycogen stores and then have carbohydrates floating around in your body so that you can just grab them, so to say, as you need them while you're running. And it is not, requiring your body to essentially cope with low blood sugar while you're actually running. I also think that weight training is incredibly important when it comes to running in a supportive manner. When we are doing just cardio but not weightlifting, that's when it can often become deconstructive. We don't have enough muscle, and muscle has been linked in so many ways to lifespan, to overall quality of life. There are really clear statistics on this that I cannot bring to mind right at this moment. But when you do both of those two things together, we see far better outcomes than if you are just running but not lifting as well. And then of course, having recovery days where you are truly just not exercising. It's okay depending on your situation to, run multiple days in a row. But if you're running every single day and you're not recovering, that's a big red flag. Another thing that's been important about nutrition is during long runs, particularly for me, if it's over 4 to 6 miles, if I'm running for more than about an hour, making sure that I have a strategy for intra-run nutrition. You can't expect to be running for more than an hour, multiple hours, and not providing your body with fuel as you go. So having an easy carbohydrate source that you're able to get down that's not difficult to digest, because your digestion is not going to be working particularly well when you're running. You really just need sugar to enter your system. That's been absolutely massive for not just being able to keep going, but feeling good throughout the rest of the day. And of course that has a pretty direct impact on your hormone health because of that blood sugar, stress hormone, thyroid, fertility hormone, all of that relationship. I do just want to be clear that a marathon distance and that effort isn't something that I would consider constructive in and of itself. That's really a challenge. That's really a stretch. It is something that is inevitably going to be putting your body into a state of stress. But I think we also have to consider, in the grand scheme of things, there are times where we deliberately subject ourselves to even extreme stressors for the sake of growth. And something really big for me is I just want to see what my body's capable of, particularly when I consider people who are like in the military or in some other way, just by circumstance that they're not necessarily themselves choosing, having to really push themselves to the physical limits. I find that incredibly inspiring, and almost convicting in a sense that like I want to be able to discipline my body to do what I tell it to do and to be able to perform in whatever circumstance. Obviously that could be taken to an extreme, but I want to be able to expect my body to perform. And I want to do that lovingly. I want that to come from a place of support. And again, it's constructive, it's not deconstructive. I'm not like whipping myself into shape. But I think there's a lot to be said for training up your body and being able to have that self-discipline. As a whole, training is going really well. As I mentioned earlier, I'm just really astounded to see that at this point we're running, again, 15 miles is the longest I've done. And just 4 months ago, running 3 miles felt like everything I had in me. Now it's the kind of thing where I'd look at 3 miles and I'd be like, oh, that's a short run. Like we have a 5 mile run and I'm like, oh, easy peasy, that's a short run. It's crazy. I've even like started to enjoy the feeling of those shorter runs. Just been able to treat it more like almost a walk where I'm outside having a good time thinking. The longer runs are definitely really challenging. I think I consistently hit this spot in them where it's like we usually have like 3 or 4 miles left to go, and I'm just really having to push through it. Sometimes there are tears involved, but it's been like an incredibly rewarding experience, and I am like astounded by the body's ability to adapt, especially in such a short period of time. It's been incredibly empowering ultimately.
What has the hardest part of it?
Yeah, interestingly, the hardest part hasn't had to do with the running itself. Yes, again, those long runs, especially as they're getting kind of like into the teens, are challenging and sometimes emotional, but I can push myself through an acute effort. That's really not a problem. It is, I think, navigating like my energy needs, regulating my blood sugar, and figuring out how to like make sure that I also have energy that I need and want to kind of go through the rest of my life. Like it's 100% doable, but when you start doing a high volume of cardio, obviously your carbohydrate needs really increase, and it's just been interesting and I think actually really helpful for me to experience this in myself so that when I am working with clients, I can have a greater level of like empathy and understanding for adapting macronutrient needs and meal timing to fit the activity, and then just figuring out what rest needs to look like, when I need extra rest, when I need a little bit more involved recovery, and when it's okay to just push through so that my body is able to perform well, again, not just in those runs but in my lifting sessions, and then just like so I feel like a happy, good, thriving human in my day-to-day life.
Yeah. What things have you done nutrition-wise?
Yeah, so definitely increased my carbohydrate needs. That's been the number one nutrition shift that I've made, or increased my carbohydrate intake rather. And at the beginning, like when we first started, I was kind of doing that like over the course of the whole day, and I was just not feeling the best. Like I was having a difficult time kind of like regulating hunger and satiety. So what I started doing was really targeting my nutrition around my run specifically, and making sure that I'm getting a lot of carbohydrates in right before my run. I have a formula that I'm using before long runs especially. And then replenishing my glycogen stores right afterwards, so getting in more carbohydrates, but also having a lot of protein immediately. Have been using like protein shakes, because before a run, that's actually one instance in which I'm not going to be eating a lot of protein because I want immediate access to my carbohydrates. And I don't want protein to slow that down, whereas under pretty much any other circumstance, I'm gonna want that protein and fat to help stabilize my blood sugar response. But since I'm not having, that protein really before a run, I wanna make sure that I'm kind of making up for it after, so that I am back to like neutral for the rest of the day. So I will have extra protein, really replenish, and that's made a massive difference in my energy levels through the rest of the day. I think the biggest surprise in the marathon training process so far has been that I definitely expected it to be a physical challenge, right? To spur physical growth. What I did not anticipate is the mental and like spiritual growth that would happen through this. I think that ties back to what I was saying about discipline and like the value in disciplining oneself. It's really ultimately not even about the physical. It's about being able to show up and hold yourself accountable even when you don't feel like it. Like even when you don't want to wake up early, even when you don't want to go on a run. I want to check this with, we need to have this balanced view of taking care of ourselves, working constructively, nourishing our bodies. They're a gift and it is a matter of stewardship. That's very much how I see it. But part of stewardship is discipline. And I've just honestly been driven to a lot of prayer and a lot of like mental fortitude, I suppose, in those moments where I've had to just like discipline my mind and do something that doesn't exactly feel good in the moment. And that's built, honestly, a ton of confidence for me. Holding my word, keeping my word to myself. It's insane what that does for your confidence levels.